We often think about marriage ending as, this huge dramatic thing, like big fights, maybe doors slamming, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, the big explosion.
Exactly. But what if it's quieter than that? More like a slow fade. Today, we're doing a deep dive into something called silent divorce.
What we want to do in this deep dive is unpack what's going on inside a silent divorce.
Okay.
What actually defines it? What are the signs? And crucially, what does it really mean for the people living through it and their families too?
Okay, so let's get straight to it then. This idea of a silent divorce, what does it actually look like day to day?
Well, you might hear other names for it too, like emotional divorce, quiet divorce. But the core thing, the absolute heart of it, is that the connection, the feeling of love, of intimacy in the marriage, it's just really faded. Or maybe it's gone altogether.
So you could have two people still sharing a roof, maybe doing the same routines, but emotionally they're just completely separate, like on different wavelengths.
That's it, exactly. The partnership, the real feeling of it feels over. For all sorts of reasons, they haven't actually filed any papers or made it official.
And the sources we looked at, they mentioned some of those reasons, didn't they? Like the classic staying together for the kids.
Oh yeah, that comes up a lot. There's a very common reason people give.
Right.
But what's really striking in the material is how it questions that logic. It points out that living like that, in that kind of emotional silence, can actually be pretty harmful for everyone, including the kids.
That really makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. Because you have to ask, what kind of relationship model are those kids seeing day in, day out? A home that looks stable but lacks real warmth or connection.
Yeah, probably not the healthiest example for anyone growing up, really. Okay, so we've got the basic idea. What are some actual signs, like things you might notice if a couple is heading into or already in this silent divorce situation?
One of the biggest ones, and it sounds a bit odd given the name silent, is actually about communication. Or rather, the lack of it. A really significant drop, maybe even stopping talking altogether.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit. It's not just that they aren't having deep chats every night, is it? It's more fundamental.
Oh, much more. It's a reduction in even like basic sharing. People stop talking about their day, what they're thinking, feeling, even just practical stuff sometimes. And sometimes not talking becomes a way to avoid fights. It's like a tactic to keep the peace, superficially at least.
So the silence is a shield against conflict, but what's the trade-off?
Well, that's just it. That lack of interaction just speeds up the whole decline. If you stop talking, you lose that connection, that chance to understand each other. The gap just gets wider and wider, faster and faster.
It's also really interesting that the sources flag the absence of arguments as another potential warning sign. That feels a bit backward, doesn't it? Surely less fighting is good.
It does seem counterintuitive, yeah. We usually think arguments problems.
Right.
But no arguments doesn't always mean harmony. It can actually signal something deeper, like a loss of investment. People just don't care enough to fight anymore.
So it's not agreement, it's apathy. They've just stopped trying to even find common ground.
Pretty much. It becomes easier to just withdraw, avoid the whole thing, rather than put the energy into another disagreement that probably goes nowhere.
And that withdrawal can spread.
Absolutely. It can easily spill over into physical intimacy, stopping, maybe even sleeping in separate rooms. It's like they're pulling apart on all these different levels, bit by bit.
That sounds incredibly lonely, actually, just coexisting. What's another major sign the sources mention?
Something really fundamental.
Yeah.
Loss of respect.
Yeah.
In relationships that are working, even when you disagree, there's usually this base level of care, of valuing the other person.
Right, you still fundamentally respect them.
Exactly. But in a marriage sliding towards this silent state, that respect can just erode really badly.
And we're not talking about just being annoyed sometimes, are we? It's deeper, like how they actually see the other person's value.
Yes, exactly. It's like one or both partners start thinking, feeling that the other person's opinions, their feelings, their needs, they just don't matter much anymore. And sadly, that can come out in how they treat each other. Mean comments, dismissive behavior, maybe even properly degrading words or actions. It's like the basic goodwill between them has just evaporated.
That sounds so damaging, like the actual foundation is just crumbling.
It really is. And often that leads right into the next sign, which is this kind of pervasive ambivalence.
Yeah.
Just not caring that much anymore.
Ambivalence, meaning?
Meaning becoming emotionally detached. Your spouse's well-being, their successes, their struggles. They just don't hit you with the same emotional impact.
So good news or bad news about them just doesn't register in the same way.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
The source material talks about how the other person just doesn't hold the same significance in their life. And what happens then?
They start living separate lives.
Exactly. People tend to become much more independent, pursuing their own hobbies, making plans, making decisions, often without really checking in with their partner or involving them much at all. That sense of a shared journey, mutual support, it just fades.
Wow. So they're sharing a postcode, but not really a life anymore. Okay, now. As we're talking through these signs, I bet some listeners might be thinking about their own relationships, or perhaps relationships they know. If someone listening recognizes these patterns, what's the advice?
Yeah, that's a really key point. Look, you could be in this situation without ever putting the label silent divorce on it.
It might just feel like distance.
Yeah, just a growing distance, maybe finding it harder and harder to connect. It can creep up on you, Not necessarily one big blow up, just this gradual drifting.
Okay, so if someone feels that drift and they want to try and change course, what's the first step recommended?
Getting professional help. Specifically, things like marital counseling or couples therapy.
Right.
Because that gives you a space, hopefully a safe one, with structure to actually talk about what's going on. A therapist can help facilitate communication, maybe offer some tools or new ways of looking at things that are hard to find on your own.
Sometimes, even with therapy, it might just be too late.
If one person, or maybe both, has just become so detached, so checked out emotionally, that they're just not invested anymore, or maybe they're just unwilling to do the work needed, well, then saving the marriage becomes incredibly difficult, maybe impossible. You can't really force connection if the will isn't there.
And if that's the reality, if the connection just can't be rekindled,
separation and maybe eventually divorce might actually be the path forward for everyone's well-being in the long run. And interestingly, they actually provide contact details for family law attorneys. It's a very practical nod to where things might need to go.
That's quite direct. It's sobering, but I guess it's an important reality check. But let's say a couple does decide to try and work on it.
You're going to try and rebuild. Both people need to be ready for some really honest talk about what they need, what they expect from the relationship now, and crucially, if they're genuinely willing to put in the effort.
And it's not a quick fix.
Definitely not. The sources are clear. Tackling these deep-seated issues takes time. It takes patience and real commitment from both sides.
And then the bottom line is, if those efforts don't work out, or if one person just isn't willing to try anymore,
then moving on individually might be the most constructive thing for their future well-being.
Yeah.
It's that difficult truth, isn't it? Knowing when you've tried, when the efforts have been exhausted, and accepting that can be a really important step towards healing and finding happiness down the line.
Okay. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the main things we should really take away about this idea of silent divorce?
Well, I think the key is understanding it's defined by that deep emotional disconnect, even while legally married. And that shows up in things like communication just collapsing, respect disappearing, and people basically living separate lives under the same roof.
And it's really important to be aware of those signs, which can be subtle sometimes, right? Not just for the couple, but thinking about the ripple effect on the whole family.
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, this whole discussion prompts a different thought for you listening, which is think about connection in any important relationship you have. Because fostering that open communication, talking about needs and expectations as they change over time, that's valuable everywhere, isn't it? Not just in marriage. Doing that proactively, even before any signs of trouble appear, can make such a difference in keeping connections healthy.